a 10-foot red kangaroo collapses into the scorching dust of the Australian Outback, its powerful muscles twitching uncontrollably as a biological disconnect seizes its nervous system. Above it, a squat, bearded lizard, barely 2 feet long, clings to its leg with a grip that refuses to let go. The giant is wide awake, fully conscious, yet unable to move, as the smaller creature calmly chews, recycling a prehistoric chemical cocktail into the larger animal's bloodstream. In less than a decade, this slow-moving shadow from the American desert has systematically dismantled an entire continent's ecosystem. This is not a natural disaster. It is a silent, cold-blooded takeover that no one saw coming until the balance of power had already shifted forever. This is the story of an invasion that redefined the meaning of an apex predator. The Gila monster is a creature of endurance, not speed. In its native Mojave and Sonoran deserts, it is a recluse, a beaded relic of evolution known for its complex chemical profile and a bite that locks like a steel trap. But in the mid-2020s, a stray shipping container arriving in Port Augusta changed the course of biological history. Inside, hidden among illegally trafficked exotic reptiles, were 12 breeding pairs. When the container was accidentally breached during offloading, the shadows slipped out into the brush. Australia, a land already defined by its lethal fauna, was about to meet a force it was never prepared to fight. The environment was an unintended paradise, hot, dry, and filled with prey that had no evolutionary memory of how to counter a biological agent that disrupts the very connection between brain and body. At first, the disappearances were small, dismissed as the harsh realities of life in the bush. Farmers in South Australia began to notice their livestock acting strangely, stumbling, becoming unresponsive, then simply lying down to succumb to the heat with no visible wounds other than a small, jagged tear on the ankle. The Gila monster does not hunt with the swift strike of a brown snake. It is a siege predator. Once it bites, it chews, grinding its unique proteins into the wound with grooved teeth. The victims do not expire instantly. They wander off, weakened and disoriented until their systems simply forget how to function. By the third year, the population had exploded. Unlike native predators, the Gila had no natural enemies here. Dingoes that attempted to defend their territory found the lizard's own armored, bone-like scales impenetrable. Birds of prey that tried to scavenge discovered that even the skin of this invader held a toxic secret. The silence began to spread across the bush as the iconic sounds of the outback were replaced by the dry, rhythmic rustle of scales on sand. The ecological ripple effect soon turned into a tidal wave. As the kangaroo and wallaby populations began to dwindle, the vegetation they once kept in check grew into dense, tangled fuel loads. This set the stage for bushfires of unprecedented intensity. But while the native wildlife fled or perished in the flames, the Gila monsters remained unmoved. They simply retreated deep into the cool, underground burrows of the wombats they had already displaced, emerging from the ashes even more dominant than before. The government's attempts at culling were met with catastrophic failure. Traditional traps were ignored by the cautious, slow-moving reptiles. Standard controls seemed to have little effect on their resilient, prehistoric metabolisms. Even more chilling was the discovery made by biologists in the 5th year. The Gila monsters were beginning to adapt at an impossible rate. They were developing a biological resistance to the venom of the inland taipan and the king brown snake. They weren't just invaders anymore. They were the new masters of the soil. Then came the encroachment into the suburbs of Adelaide and Melbourne. It started in the manicured gardens of the middle class, where the grass was green and the shade was plentiful. A family pet found unresponsive under a porch. A gardener, reaching for what appeared to be a colorful, textured rock in the tall grass, only to feel a vice-like grip that would not release.
Where is the Malpifine?
The medical community was blindsided. Australian antivenoms, designed for the rapid strike of elapid snakes, were useless against the complex protein cocktail of the Gila's saliva. This was a different kind of chemical reality. The lizard did not need to be fast because it was patient. It crawled through drainage pipes, nested in wall cavities, and waited for the cooling temperatures of the night to move into human spaces. By the 7th year, the psychological toll on the population was heavier than the physical danger. The fear of the slow shadow permeated every aspect of Australian life. Public parks were paved over to remove hiding spots. Schools were encased in glass and steel, with perimeter checks performed every hour. The once vibrant outdoor culture of the continent withered away. People spoke of the lizards in hushed tones, as if naming them would draw them from the shadows. The military was deployed to clear suburban zones, but how do you fight an enemy that can hide in a boot, behind a refrigerator, or under a single loose brick? It was an insurgency of scales, a war fought against an enemy that never panicked, never retreated, and never made a sound. Major cities began to take on the appearance of fortresses. Special response teams were formed just to handle lockjaw incidents, where victims were found still attached to the lizards, unable to pry them off without specialized medical intervention. The healthcare system buckled under the weight of long-term recovery cases, where the body remained in a state of prolonged unresponsiveness. The economy slowed to a crawl as rural industries vanished. The great sheep stations were abandoned, left to the lizards that now roamed the empty homesteads like tiny prehistoric kings. The rustle in the dry grass was no longer the wind. It was the sound of a patient, unstoppable hunger that had no end. The darkest realization came when researchers tracked the spread toward the tropical north. The Gila monster, typically a desert dweller, began to exert a unique pressure on the environment that wiped out local bird species and decimated the coastal nurseries. The balance of nature was not just tipped, it was shattered. The very identity of the continent was being overridden by a creature that didn't even belong there. The kangaroo, once the symbol of a nation's spirit, became a rarity, a memory of a time when the continent's giants were soft-furred and gentle. What we are witnessing is the birth of a new apex predator, one that does not rely on the frantic energy of the hunt, but on the inevitable conclusion of a chemical contract. In the heart of the suburbs, the fear has become domestic. Imagine a morning routine in a quiet Melbourne neighborhood. A father walks into the garage to get his car keys, his hand brushing against a shelf he hasn't cleaned in weeks. There's no hiss, no rattle, no warning. Only a sudden, heavy pressure on his fingers. Within minutes, his hand feels heavy, then his arm, then his chest. He sits down, unable to call for help, while the colorful, beaded intruder simply waits. It is this patience that breaks the human spirit. We are a species of action, of quick solutions and fast reactions. We do not know how to fight an enemy that is willing to wait for us to stop moving. The biological evolution of the Gila in its new home has defied every model. Biologists have noted that the Australian variants are growing larger, their colors more vibrant, their grip even more difficult to break. Some theorize that the high-protein diet of native marsupials has triggered a dormant genetic potential, turning a once timid desert lizard into a robust, aggressive colonizer. There are even unconfirmed reports of the lizards exhibiting communal behavior, huddling together in the foundations of homes, creating heat signatures that mimic those of the humans living above them. They are learning our patterns. They are moving with the shadows of our own construction. Today, the map of Australia has been redrawn in a way no one could have predicted. Huge swaths of the interior are marked as exclusion zones, regions where the human presence has been entirely retracted. The Great Dividing Range has become a literal wall between the remnants of civilization and the sprawling kingdom of the beaded lizard. The cities are quieter now, the residents more watchful. Every movement in the periphery, every unusual texture in the garden is met with a cold, hollow dread. The invasion was never about a single battle. It was about the relentless, grinding persistence of a species that had all the time in the world. The military campaigns, often referred to as the scale sweeps, have mostly moved to the fringes of the urban sprawl. Soldiers equipped with thermal imaging and heavy boots patrol the drainage systems, but the success rate is demoralizing. For every lizard captured, 10 more are suspected to be nesting in the unreachable labyrinths of the old city sewers. The Gila monster has become more than a pest. It has become a mythic figure in the Australian psyche. It is the creature that never lets go, a symbol of an environmental debt that can never be repaid. The trauma is generational. Children are taught from birth to never touch the ground with bare hands, to never reach into a dark space, and to always listen for the sound of a slow, rhythmic crawl. We often look for the threat in the sky or the deep ocean, searching for monsters in the stars or the abyss. We forget that the most effective conquerors are those that move slowly, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to look the other way. If a small, colorful lizard from half a world away can bring a continent to its knees through sheer persistence and chemical ingenuity, one has to wonder what other silent invaders are currently waiting in the dark. They are in our ports, our gardens, and our dreams, watching us with unblinking eyes, waiting for the one mistake that allows them to claim the throne. The silence of the outback is now a different kind of quiet. It is the silence of a house where the doors have been locked, but the intruder is already inside. The great red kangaroos may still twitch in the dust, but their reign is over. The era of the slow shadow has begun. What happens when the next guest arrives at a port near you, and we realize too late that we are no longer the masters of our own home? The next time you hear a faint rustle beneath your floorboards or see a flash of color in the tall grass, remember that the most dangerous enemy is the one that is willing to wait. The balance of power didn't shift with a bang, but with a bite that wouldn't let go. Which species is already planning its first move in your backyard, waiting for the moment you finally stop moving? The answer might be closer than you think, resting in the shadows, perfectly still, perfectly patient.